Hello everyone, Helen here, and welcome into the Campervan. Today I'm going to take you off on the next part 3 of my husband Phil and I's recent campervan trip to Orkney. And it's been lovely as ever to read all the lovely comments, and it's really nice when people their memories have been triggered by a place I've been to, not necessarily because they've been there themselves, although Pam told me that she actually got engaged in St Margaret's Hope, which was the first little place we came to when we'd crossed to Orkney. And Caroline was reminded of an old family friend when I was showing the Old Man of Hoy, because quite a long time ago the climber Joe Brown was filmed climbing the Old Man of Hoy. It was kind of a live programme on the television, and so she was telling me about her connection with Joe Brown, and that he was actually taught to climb by an old family friend of theirs called Merrick. So it was lovely to hear about that as well. So thank you everyone. And I think I'll better get on with it. So when I left you last time, we'd just arrived back on mainland Orkney. That's the largest of the Orkney Islands, after our lovely time on Hoy. We found a place with a view to eat some breakfast, and then we headed along to Kirkwall, which is the largest town on the Orkney Islands, with a population of about 10,000 people, which is just under half the population of the entire set of islands. The main factor in Kirkwall's development was the harbour, which was in use from the earliest times when the Norse people arrived here. Kirkwall was at the heart of their empire, and that stretched from Scandinavia to Iceland and Shetland and the Western Isles. The name Kirkwall comes from the Norse Kirkjuvagr, which means church bay. A church was built here in the late 11th century, and that was dedicated to St Olaf. There are two main shopping streets that stretch from the harbour to the centre of the town, where the cathedral makes a striking focal point. We passed by the interestingly named craft shop called the Tree Shop. An old sycamore tree, known locally as the Big Tree, grows right in front of the shop window. It was planted there 200 years ago, when it was in the garden of a grand house, before the shopping street was built. It's a landmark that's much loved by the locals, though the tree isn't in the best of health anymore, with a metal rod strengthening it at its centre. I didn't go into the shop on this occasion, but instead we continued on to the Orcadian bookshop. A lovely shop, and it includes a big section of books relating to the Orkney Islands: history, prehistory, natural history, geography, geology, and literature, and even music, which was the main reason that I'd wanted to go into the shop. And I found the book that I was looking for, a collection of Orkney tunes, some of which you'll already have heard to accompany our Orkney travel videos. After lunch in the Real Food Cafe opposite the cathedral, I had a lovely scone, jam and cream. We walked a short way to the Orkney Museum, which is housed in Ness House, built at the beginning of the 16th century for a family who lived there for over 300 years. We particularly wanted to go to the exhibition about the Ness of Brodgar, an area of mainland Orkney that's been under excavation since 2004. It's an extensive and remarkable collection of at least 40 Neolithic buildings. Investigations there have enriched our understanding of what life was like all those thousands of years ago, although it's possibly raised as many questions as it's answered. Phil and I visited the dig site 10 years ago, and this was our first chance to see some of the artefacts that had been discovered. The people who lived in these buildings certainly left behind quite a variety of objects, both useful and decorative. There was a huge variety of stone tools, each type with a specific job. From large to small, there were axes, knives, hammers, scrapers, and more. I loved all the tiny things, little beads and tiny clay pots. I like to think that people then were just as charmed by miniatures as we are today. All sorts of decorative stonework was discovered too, showing that people then were just as interested in the appearance of their dwellings as we are now, some being painted and others decorated with intricate carvings. Aside from the exhibition, there's a wealth of archaeological information to be found in the museum. I loved these decorated Pictish pebbles, apparently only found in Orkney and Shetland. Experts have concluded that the patterns on them were painted with brushes, and it's just another connection with the present day and especially appeals to those of us who love painted pebbles. I was particularly on the lookout for evidence of past crafting, and I saw things such as spindle whorls and pins, and a replica of an amazing hood that was found preserved in peat, dating back 2,000 years. The original can be seen in the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, but it was lovely to get a close-up look at this reproduction. Archaeologists actually think that whoever made the hood was reusing fabric that had originally been made into something else. Craft-related exhibits from later times were on display as well, including knitted socks and embroidery and spinning and weaving. Well, it was then time to get back to the van and go in search of an overnight spot. So we drove north out of Kirkwall towards the northeast coast of mainland. We parked by the sea and straight away got on with making something to eat. Today's meal was going to be halloumi burgers, which involved frying the pieces of cheese and softening some chopped peppers and onions and spreading the bread rolls with guacamole. We were very happy to have the van door open because it wasn't too windy or cold, and there weren't even any midges to bother us. In fact, the midges stayed away for our whole time in Orkney. We put some of the pepper and onion mixture onto each of the rolls, then a slice of halloumi in each one, and they were really tasty. The area of sea next to the car park we were in is called Hallo Sound. There's a very tiny island called Hallo there, no longer inhabited, although in 1841 there were apparently 26 people living there. It lies between mainland and the island of Rousay. The car park is actually there for visitors to the Brock of Ness, a fine example of an Iron Age circular tower. So once we'd finished eating, and because daylight in this far northern region extended our day until late into the evening, we walked along to visit the site of the Brock. Brocks were built around 400 BC to about 100 BC, and no one really knows their purpose, though lots of people presume that they were some sort of defensive structure. Originally, the tower would have been up to 42 feet high, that's about 13 metres, with a single entrance and no windows. Something that tall was unusual at the time and would have been an impressive landmark. It was quite an investment of time and effort too, It's been estimated that the Brock would have taken about 6 months to build if 20 people were working on it. After that, we took a final look across the Sound and the setting sun, and we got our heads down for the night. After our morning cups of tea the next day, we had about a 20-minute drive to the ferry terminal at Kirkwall to catch a ferry to the island of Rousay. The ferry here isn't a roll-on, roll-off design like the larger ferries, so we took note of the signs telling us that we would be reversing onto the ferry. After a little wait, the ferry arrived and its passengers disembarked. Then foot passengers boarded the ferry, followed by vehicles. I think there was only space for about 12 or so vehicles, and it's always best to book in advance if possible. Phil carefully reversed on, with me kneeling on the back seat to give you a view of us reversing onto the ferry. It didn't take long for everyone to board, and we then left mainland for the 2-mile crossing to Rousay, which was fairly calm and sunny, though fairly breezy as well. The island's name has its origins, you won't be surprised to learn, in the Norse language, originally known as Hrolf's Island. Rousay is sometimes nicknamed Egypt of the North because of the high density of archaeological sites there. There are more than 150 sites on an island that's only about 4.5 by 5.5 miles, and the road that circles the island is about 13 miles or 20 kilometres long. About 200 people live on Rousay, which has got a landscape of hills, moorland and cliffs, and we headed first for the excellent Heritage Centre to learn more. We learnt about past inhabitants of the island, such as Betty and her husband David, who worked as a cobbler in the late 1800s, and saw recollections of school days on Rousay, such as a memory of when the teacher made hot cocoa at lunchtimes on cold winter days. There were tales of folklore, such as the Selkies, who could change shape between human and seal form, and of solitary stones that changed into giants each New Year's Day. There was information about people of the more ancient past, such as a lady buried over 1,000 years ago with her newborn infant, along with some beautiful Celtic jewellery, such as this wolf brooch, and I had fun doing a wax rubbing of a reproduction of the brooch. was plenty of information about the flora and fauna of the island too, and these photos from the Heritage Centre helped me identify quite a few of the flowers that we came across later in the day. We drove on a little way and found a place to stop for a lunch break. I enjoyed some sandwiches of Highland brie, really lovely. And as the good weather continued to hold out, we had wonderful views across the water again Hallo Sound to mainland Orkney. From here we began our afternoon trail of some Neolithic tombs, beginning with Taviso Tuic. The burial cairn was built here more than 5,000 years ago, and it's notable because it's a double-layered tomb. It was actually discovered in 1898 by two garden labourers who were building a garden seat into a mound. The lady of the nearby Trumland house, Eliza Burrows, supervised 3 weeks of excavations, and she wrote in her diary that this was one of the most interesting events of my life, and also, what a pity the stones cannot speak and reveal to us the intentions of their builders. How many of us have had the same thought, I wonder? We entered the cairn on the upper level, where there are several small chambers, and here excavations revealed a crouched skeleton and other human bones, some beautiful flint tools, and even a piece of shale jewellery. There's evidence that the cairn was in use for at least 1,000 years, because later people created stone boxes where cremated remains of people were laid, rather than their bodies. Originally, the upper and lower levels weren't connected, but a metal ladder now connects the two levels, and I decided to be an intrepid explorer and slowly and carefully lowered myself down into the tomb below, where more small chambers could be seen. The original entrance into this tomb was down a low, narrow passageway pointing out to sea, and you can see here the position of the entrance sited below the upper tomb. A third and separate chamber was also found, though we decided against exploring this one. We drove a short distance to visit the next tomb on the trail, called Blackhammer Cairn, and this was built 5,300 years ago, slightly earlier than the tomb we'd just left. This tomb was excavated in 1936, revealing it to be a passage tomb, where chambers were divided off on each side of the central passageway. A short grassy path leading up from the road took us to an entrance, not the original entrance. This allowed us to take a look round the inside of the tomb. The bones of 2 Neolithic men were discovered here, along with other objects perhaps left as offerings. After the excavations were complete, a concrete dome and skylight was placed over it to give the ancient stones protection from the elements. However, because the roof has skylights that enable us to have a good look at the tomb, there's actually a bit of a problem with the build-up of green algae on the stones, and experts are currently trying to tackle this issue. Archaeologists believe that the tomb was used for about 1,000 years and then sealed up, and evidence also shows that many years later the tomb took on another unknown purpose. It wasn't far to go along the road before we arrived at a little car park for our third tomb of the day, the Know of Noyso. It turned out to be quite a hike to this tomb. I hadn't spotted the sign before we set off that said it was a strenuous walk that may have steep and muddy footpaths. However, it really didn't take us all that long to trek up to the tomb, along a path that wound to and fro up the hillside to a natural terrace high up on the side of the hill, and we were certainly rewarded with some fine views across the sea when we got there. This tomb, like Blackhammer, is a passage design with stalls on each side of the centre. It may well have been a place where people regularly paid homage to their ancestors. Archaeologists found 69 flint tools in the tomb, like these flint arrowheads, and the bones of at least 36 red deer. Mixed in with the animal bones, they also found the remains of at least 29 people, including 17 skulls. Although the tomb would originally have been covered with a roof, it now has a modern concrete roof to preserve it from further damage. Our final archaeological site of the day was the largest and perhaps most impressive, Midow Brock and chambered cairn. Reaching this site was the opposite of getting to the Knowe of Noyso that we'd just been to. We had to trek down the side of a hill all the way to the seashore, and I couldn't help thinking about the fact that I'd have to walk all the way back up it to get back to the van. Still, it was well worth the effort. Midow chambered cairn is so large that a huge structure was built over the top of it to preserve it, although when it was built 5,400 years ago it would probably have appeared as a large mound of rocks. Inside, steps and walkways allow you to get a really good look at the huge number of stalls in this tomb. You can look down from above, and the remains of 25 people were found here. They would have been laid in a crouched position on benches in the stalls until their bodies decomposed, and then the remains would have been moved onto the floor. And amongst an assortment of animal bones that were found here were the remains of the tiny Orkney vole, unique to Orkney, and which would have been one of many rodents that were eaten by the local people then. But the Orkney vole has survived to this day. Right next to the chambered cairn are the remains of a much later structure, a broch, built about 3,500 years after the tomb, and similar to the one we'd visited at Ness the previous evening. In fact, on a clear day, the people living in Midow Brock would have been able to see the Broch of Ness across the water from them. I wonder if they ever met up with each other. The Broch would have been at the centre of a village, rising high above the other dwellings. Today, the Broch is right on the edge of the coastline, now protected by a sea wall to prevent it from being washed away, but at the time of its building, the sea level was much lower. In fact, many of the ancient structures on Rousay have probably already been lost to the sea. Like Ness, Midow Brock was constructed with a double-layered outer wall with stairs for accessing higher levels, and in the houses around the Broch, just as at Ness, there were many little cupboards and shelves for storing all manner of belongings, including food and tools. After a very slow slog back up the hill to the van, we decided to continue driving around the island through an area called Quandale and a settlement called West Ness. We stopped in a lovely bay to watch some seals basking on the rocks, and thanks to the Heritage Centre for this lovely photo. We didn't get one ourselves. And then we cooked ourselves some tea. We softened some leeks in butter and added them to cooked pasta and peas, then stirred in a ready-made pasta carbonara sauce. A lovely, quick and easy meal. There is actually a pub on Rousay that serves meals, but we saved that until the next evening. We continued a bit further along the northern coast of Rousay in search of an overnight spot. and found a little lay-by on a hillside looking across to the northern isles of Westray and Papa Westray. We popped the roof of the van up and we enjoyed the last of the daylight before settling down for the night. And next morning we'd be up early and off to explore 2 much smaller islands that we had never been to before. But I'm going to save those until next time and just say goodbye to you now. So until I do see you again, keep nice and busy and take great care of yourself. I will see you very soon. Okay, bye.